Hi everyone and welcome to another tutorial for Isogenic Game Engine. This tutorial will focus on the advanced user interface system built into the engine, which allows you to do things like create elements on screen on the HTML canvas. This is not using the DOM at all, or any DOM elements of any kind, except for just the canvas element. And you'll be able to style those elements. I'm just going to show you how you can position them as well with very sort of familiar positioning and styling similar to CSS. So let's get started. So for those of you who are familiar with the previous tutorials, you'll find I will tend to create a tutorial folder and go and look at the IGE folder, blank game, grab the blank game details, go back into tutorial 5 and paste. So now we have our tutorial base. Alright, so I'm just going to delete all this. We don't need to load any textures for this demonstration, so I'm also going to comment out the event that waits for textures to load. Alright, so basically have our setup. We have our base scene created by the IGE base scene, add graph, so we'll leave that in place. That just creates our viewport and our root scene from which all other things will be added. And what I'm going to do is create a new user interface scene. Now a user interface scene is slightly different from a normal scene, usually only in that it ignores cameras. So if the camera translates or rotates or updates, the user interface always remains in the same position for the viewer. So that's really the only difference in a UI scene and a normal scene. And this is how you create it. So just go new IGE scene 2D. Let's give it an ID of UI scene, and we're just going to tell it to ignore the camera. And then we're going to mount it to our base scene. Let me just quickly grab the base scene and assign it to that variable. Those of you who are not familiar with what I've just done there, you can look through previous tutorials to get an idea of what's going on here. Okay, now that we have our base scene, now that we have our UI scene, let's go ahead and create a user interface element on that scene. In fact, before we start, let's just navigate to that page quickly. Just make sure that everything's working as it should be. It's tutorial 5. I'm going to open the debug console. So there's our tutorial. It's executing, the engine running. There's nothing showing because, of course, it's a blank game. So we created our UI scene and we mounted it to base scene there. So if you have a look at the scene graph, you'll see here's our base scene and here's our UI scene mounted to that. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a UI element. So new IGE UI element. Let's give it a name. I'm going to be playful. I'm going to call it div1. It's not a div. It has nothing to do with HTML divs at all, but it's going to behave in a very similar fashion, as you'll see shortly. So I think it's kind of fun to call it that. And we're going to mount that to UI scene. Okay, save and reload. That's not going to do much. I suspect you probably won't see anything on screen at all. So yeah, again, if you have a look at your scene graph, there's the new UI element we've just created, div1. So now, this is where the magic starts. UI elements have the ability to be styled. I use the word style in inverted commas because it's not using CSS, but it's using sort of an engine equivalent. There's a DOM that I've built up within the canvas itself, which has nothing to do with the HTML DOM. It's all running inside the canvas, but it's sort of like imagine it's like a virtual DOM, and that's what this advanced user interface system built into the engine is. So I'm going to show you how you can declare a a style class and then apply that to a UI element. So to access the UI manager, you do IGE.UI. That's the UI manager. It all lives under .UI. And then we're going to go .style, and we're going to give it my style. That's the class name. And then we pass an object as the second parameter. And let's start starting this up. So first of all, let's set the width and height of our new element. So width, let's say we want it to be, I don't know, 90% of the page, of the screen rather. Actually, it's 90% of the parent entity, in which case the UI scene. UI scenes always stretch to the full size of the canvas, so they're always the same fixed size, whatever size your browser is at, basically. We'll say 90% height as well, and let's give it a border, border color. We'll just make it white for the moment. Border width of 1. Right, we've defined our style. We haven't applied it to the element yet, but let's just refresh the page, make sure there's no errors, and that style has been defined correctly. Okay, looks good. So now we're going to go ahead and apply that style to this element. So it's as simple as typing style class and giving it the name. Notice that I'm not putting the period in front. This is very much the same as CSS. So you're defining a CSS class by doing a dot, and then we apply it without the dot here. So let's just refresh that now that we've applied the style. Okay, so this is our new entity, and as you can see, if we select it, you'll see it highlighted in blue, and that's the entity running. It's got a 90% height and width. So if we resize the browser, you'll notice that the width and height of that will automatically adjust. Okay. Now, there are some other advanced features we can do. So, for instance, we want to have a border radius. Let's stick a border radius in there. Quick refresh, so you can see how that's affected it. And there you can see very, very similar to CSS, so you should be very familiar with how that works. Now, the magic comes when we start to apply states to the style as well. So, for instance, we might want to change the background or the border or something when you hover over this element. So let's go ahead and do that. What we're going to do is we're going to define a new style, IGUI style dot my style hover. And what we're going to do, I think background color, and let's make it red, shall we? So it really stands out. RGB. There we go. So we're not hovered over at the moment, and then as our mouse moves over, style becomes applied. And as you can see, the style was applied, but at this point it's probably a good idea to point out one of the differences between CSS and the engine styling system. You'll notice that our mouse is over, and as we moved away, the hover didn't switch off. Now, technically it did, but what's going on here is, if you look, in our original base style, we haven't set any kind of background color. So we kind of just want it to go back to nothing when you're not hovering. And in order to do that, you actually do have to set a background color of null. So what happens then is, as your mouse moves over the entity, this style's properties are applied, so background color, and then as you move away, it unhovers and then applies these. So effectively, the background color null overwrites background color red when we unhover, if you follow my drift. So let's refresh. Okay, we have hover, and then we have unhover. Hover, unhover. So that's how you make sure that you're cancelling out any sort of style updates that you've made when you have state changes. That's the only real difference between this and CSS. And there are various optimizations and kind of performance reasons for that, but that's how that works. So now you can see the basics of that. The next thing to kind of get an idea of is that every element has the ability to be focused. So let's say, for instance, you click on that element. That element will now have focus. You can set kind of the options on these so that they can have focus or not. For instance, if I don't want this element to be able to be hovered at all, if I don't want it to receive any kind of hover functionality at all, I can actually just turn that off. And I've just got to remind myself how to do that. I think it's hover enabled, but let me just go into the engine. Manager. Oops, and UI element. Let's have a look at the structure of this. So it's allow hover, allow focus, and allow active. So when we set that to false, if we go back into here, so we just do allow hover false. Now, if I refresh, as you can see, this element can no longer be hovered. This is very useful, in fact, if you want to optimize your elements, because it will otherwise check for a hover event on the element, so you can switch that off. So let's have a look at how focus works. It's very much the same way. We're just going to copy this and call it focus, except this time let's sort of apply a different color to it. So I think that comes out slightly yellow. I can't remember my hex codes, but let's give that a go. So remember, focus is when you've clicked on an element and you've clicked down, mouse up. After that, then it focuses. So hover, we click, and now we have yellow. Okay, excellent. Now, elements will only lose focus if focus is presented onto another element. So at this point, let's create a second element. And just for fun, we're going to mount it to the first. So we're going to call this div2, and there's our ID div1 of this. So let's mount it to div1. So we can do ID $div1, and that's what we're mounting it to. We've also provided the exact same style class. It will allow hover on this one. So let's just comment that out for a moment. All right, refresh. So now, as you can see, because the style is 90% of its parent, the two div elements, as we can call them, will maintain relative width and height on percentage as if it was in a real DOM. So there's some kind of funky stuff you can do there. And as you can see, we're hovering over the first element and they've got nothing, and we hover over the second, we've got something. Now when I click on the first element, remember we've got background null on both styles. So there is no background, therefore it's effectively see-through until we hover over it, and then you can see it happening. If we click onto this, this element has now gained focus, and now you can see, because it's focused, it has yellow on it, unless we hover, in which case the hover style is applied instead. And as you can see, we can click on that, it's still maintained focus, or we can click back and now it's lost focus. Okay, so this is very much like a standard HTML DOM. Finally, we can allow or deny focus on elements at any time. So just the same as we can allow or deny hover, let's also deny focus onto the first element. So now I've clicked on the first element there, nothing. Click on the second element, that has focus now. If I click on the first again, because it's not allowed to have focus, focus isn't taken away from the second element, so that just maintains focus. So there's a kind of a preview of kind of how powerful this system can be. I'm also going to show you very quickly how you can kind of build up a UI using the other properties left, top, bottom, and right. So I'm going to take this second div 2, and I'm going to show you how you can target an element by its ID. So very much like CSS, we've got two separate style types. You've got the period dot my style, and you've got the hash, so hash my style. Now, when you define styles in Isogenic Engine, the UI system will always allow the hash style to take precedence over any dot styles. So if I were to define two separate styles, one as a class and one as a directly to the ID, so dot and hash, the hash style would always take precedence in the particular state over the class. So in this case, I'm going to show you how we do this. I'm going to style hash div 2, and for this I'm going to set the width to null, because we're not going to present a width or height. Oh, you know what? Actually, we will. Let's give it a 300 pixels by 30 pixels. All right. Now, I want to present this. I want to put this div 2. Let's call it 10 pixels from the left of its parent. So I'll just do left 10, top 10. Now that should position it sort of top left of div 1. So let's have a look at that now. Alright, so there we are. We've now positioned up here. And as you can see, things like focus still works. If we click on that, now it's now focused. The border radius doesn't look quite so good now, so let's switch that down a little bit, shall we? So border radius, let's just call it 5. That should be cool. All right. There we are. So it's kind of nicer. I don't really like the hover, so let's just get rid of that as well. Allow hover false. In fact, we could just get rid of the hover style completely, which would be quite nice. Let's allow everything back again so that we can focus back onto the previous one and the next one. All right. The other thing I'm going to show you as well is how you can use right and bottom. So, for instance, if I wanted to switch this to right, instead of the element being where it is now 10 pixels from the left, it will now align 10 pixels from the right of its parent. So there we are, as you can see. Clicking on it again, there now it has focus. The same goes for top and bottom. So bottom, and there it is. You can also present percentages if you wish. So instead of 10 pixels, let's say 10%, which should give it a bigger gap. Okay, and there we are. And as you can see, as you resize the window, the elements are always staying within their percentage values, as you would expect. All right. And finally, whilst we're looking at the UI system, I'm just going to very briefly demonstrate the new Textbox interface. So I'm just going to go ahead, new IGE UI Textbox, and we'll give this the same style class as the one we've already got, and mount to IGE div 1 as well. Let's give us an idea of TX1, and then let's set the style for TX1 to something similar to div 2. So TX1, excuse me. We're just going to put that at the top right, top left, sorry. 10 pixels, and there we are. Now the text box, I believe, also requires a font sheet, or at least it needs to know what font it's using. Let's just run it and see if it works without it. I don't think it does, but I can't remember now. This engine is so massive, it's very difficult to remember anything. Yep. Okay, so that's not going to work without a texture. So I'm just going to jump in and take a quick look at the class so I can remind myself exactly what it requires. Okay, we don't actually have to provide a font sheet. We can talk directly to the font entity and provide it with a native font, I believe. Let's have a quick look at that. Native font, yeah. All right, native stroke. All right, so let's just go back to our project. Just assigning it to a variable so I can access it easier. All right, tx1 dot font entity dot native font Dana 10px dot stroke color, and we'll make the text white as well. Easy. Okay, let's just quickly go back to the IG, make sure I did that properly. It's native stroke, native stroke, native stroke color. Oh no, it's not, it's color overlay. Sorry. Yeah, stroke is something different. It sort of creates an outline around the text rather than filling it. So we have color overlay, that's what we want. Now, theoretically, since that was a little bit hacky, I apologise for that. I haven't familiarised myself with this before creating the tutorial because I've been a bit busy. Oops, let's just focus on that element so we can see what we're doing. Okay, there's the text I just wrote, hello. I'm just going to turn off the focus background, and I'm going to change it to a border so that we can kind of see what's going on a bit better. So let's just switch the border color to yellow if we're focused. That'll be, I think, a little bit easier for the eyes. That's better. So now if we're focused on an element, it will just turn yellow. Okay, perfect. So I've just clicked on this text box. I'm just going to type hello exclamation mark, and there we go. Space, space, space. Boo. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to push Home, and I'm going to push Delete. And there we go. The text is gone. I could also type hello, and then I could move. I'm going to push the left key now. 1, 2, 3. So I should be between the E and the L. And I'm just going to type some mumble jumble text. So you can see the text box working. There are a couple of bits on here that are going to be updated shortly. This is still a beta version of the UI system, version 1.2.4 on the dev branch. There will be a caret text caret position in the text box shortly, and you'll also be able to highlight text with the mouse and delete as well. So that would be useful, I think. Anyway, this concludes the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. And don't hesitate to leave a comment in YouTube if you want to, or you can catch us at www.isogenicengine.com. Cheers, bye bye.